There is a garden just outside the eastern wall of Jerusalem. It is after midnight. The Passover moon is high and bright enough to read by. And in the silver light, between the old gnarled trunks of olive trees that have stood there since before the Romans came, a man is on his knees. His friends are asleep a stone's throw away. He asked them to stay awake. They couldn't manage it. He is alone, and he is praying. Here is something that will stay with you long after this video ends. Jesus prayed more than any figure in all of Scripture. More than David. More than Moses. More than Daniel, who prayed 3 times a day with his window opened toward Jerusalem even when it meant lions. The Gospels record Jesus slipping away before sunrise to pray, staying up all night to pray, praying before healings, praying after miracles, praying in crowds, praying in deserts, praying on mountainsides, and praying at the very end, in a garden where the sweat on his face fell to the ground like drops of blood. And yet, for all those hours and all those words spoken between the Son and the Father, we only have 7 recorded prayers. 7, that's all we've been given. 7 windows into the most intimate conversation in human history, the voice of God the Son speaking to God the Father in the language of desperation, surrender, grief, and love. We are going to walk through all 7 today. And I want to warn you now, not at the end, but right here at the beginning, one of these prayers will disturb you. It disturbed the disciples. It disturbed the early church. Theologians have been arguing about it for 2,000 years. It is 4 words in Aramaic. It is the sound of heaven going silent. And by the time we get to it, you will understand why it might be the most important thing Jesus ever said. But we begin somewhere else. We begin with a hillside, a crowd, and a question. Someone in the crowd asks Jesus how to pray. It seems like a simple question. It is not. The disciples had seen Jesus pray. They had watched him disappear before dawn and come back with something in his eyes that wasn't there before. They had seen him pray over 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish and somehow feed 5,000 people. They had heard him pray at the tomb of a man who had been dead for 4 days, and then watched that man walk out. So when they ask, Lord, teach us to pray, they are not asking for a technique. They are asking for access. They are asking, whatever you have with the Father, can we have that too? And Jesus gives them what we now call the Lord's Prayer. You know it. You've said it in churches and at gravesides and maybe in the back seat of a car when things got bad enough that you didn't know what else to do. Our Father, who art in heaven. Here's what most people miss. Jesus almost never prayed this prayer himself. The Lord's Prayer is a template he gave to his followers, a structure, a rhythm, a shape for human prayer. But when Jesus himself prayed, he didn't follow the pattern. He was the pattern. He didn't say forgive us our debts because he had none. He didn't say lead us not into temptation as a petition for himself. He said it as a teacher handing a map to people who were about to walk through terrain he had already crossed. The prayer he taught is a gift for us. The prayers he prayed are a window into him, and those are 2 very different things. There is a tomb outside the village of Bethany, 2 miles from Jerusalem. It is a cave with a stone rolled across the entrance. Inside is a man named Lazarus. And he has been dead for 4 days. His sisters are outside the tomb. Mary collapsed on the ground. Martha standing with her arms folded across her chest the way you stand when you are trying not to fall apart. The crowd that followed Jesus from the road is watching. Some of them are already crying. Jesus looks at the tomb, and then he does something unexpected. He prays out loud. In almost every other moment of prayer in the Gospels, Jesus goes away. He climbs a mountain. He crosses a lake. He slips out before dawn so that no one sees him. Prayer, for Jesus, is intensely private, the place where the Son speaks to the Father without an audience. But here, at the tomb of his friend, in front of a grieving crowd, Jesus prays out loud. And what he says gives us the first clue about what his private prayers sound like. Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me. But I said this on account of the people standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me. Read that carefully. He is not asking God to raise Lazarus. He already knows it will happen. He is thanking the Father for something that has not occurred yet in the natural world, as if the prayer was already answered before he arrived. Before the crowd gathered. Before the stone was even in sight. This is what the prayer life of Jesus looks like from the inside. It is not a negotiation. It is not a list of requests submitted and pending. It is a continuous, unbroken conversation between two persons who are never out of contact, and the prayer that gets spoken out loud is just a small piece of something much larger that never stops. Stay with me, because the next prayer takes us deeper still. It is the night of the Last Supper. The bread has been broken. The wine has been poured. Judas has already left the room. Jesus knows what the next 12 hours will bring: the garden, the arrest, the trial, the cross. He has hours left, and he doesn't spend them explaining theology. He spends them praying. John 17 is the longest recorded prayer of Jesus. 26 verses. It is called the high priestly prayer. And when you read it slowly, not the way you skim a chapter before bed, but the way you read a letter that was written to you personally, it will change the way you understand prayer forever. Because here is what Jesus prays for in John 17. He prays for himself first: Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son. He is not being selfish. He is acknowledging that what is about to happen is the moment the entire history of creation has been moving toward. And he is asking the Father to let it happen fully. Then he prays for his disciples, by name. Though John doesn't give us the names. He prays for their protection. He prays that they would be sanctified in truth. He prays that the joy he has, that strange, settled, unshakable joy that exists even now, in this room, with Judas already gone, would be made complete in them. And then, and this is the moment that should stop you, Jesus prays for you, not for people like you, not for future believers in the abstract. He says, I do not ask for these only, but also for those who will believe in me through their word. That's you. If you have ever believed anything about Jesus Christ, if you have ever said yes to him, even quietly, even badly, even with doubts still circling, he was thinking of you in that upper room. He prayed for you in the sense that matters most. He prayed for the kind of person you would be, in the kind of world you would be born into, facing the kind of grief and confusion and doubt that you would carry, 2,000 years before you existed. He prayed for you. Now we go to the garden. It is after the prayer of John 17. Jesus and his disciples have walked down from the upper room, through the streets of Jerusalem, out through the eastern gate, across the Kidron Valley, and into the grove of olive trees on the slope of the Mount of Olives. The garden is called Gethsemane, from the Aramaic Gachmanim, meaning olive press, a place where olives are crushed to extract what is inside them. The name is not an accident. Jesus leaves most of the disciples near the entrance and takes 3 of them, Peter, James, and John, the same 3 who saw the transfiguration, deeper into the garden. And here he does something he has never done in front of them before. He tells them he is afraid, not in those exact words. The Greek is beralipos, overwhelmed with grief to the point of death. Crushed. The same 3 men who saw his face shine like the sun on the mountain now watch him fall face down on the ground and press his forehead into the dirt. And he prays, My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. This is the most human prayer in Scripture, and the most divine. Human because it is a man on the ground, in the dark, asking to be spared from something terrible. Divine because in the same breath, without pause, he surrenders the answer. Here's the part nobody tells you. He prays this prayer 3 times, not once. With dignity, in a posture of serene sacrifice. 3 times, returning to the same words, the same ground, the same darkness, because this is what prayer actually looks like when the stakes are highest. It is not a composed monologue. It is a conversation that keeps returning to the hardest question, trying to find a way through. Between the first and second prayer, he goes back to his disciples and finds them asleep. He wakes them. Could you not watch with me 1 hour? He is not angry. He is heartbroken. And he goes back to pray again. The physician Luke tells us something no other gospel records, that Jesus was in such anguish during this prayer that his sweat fell to the ground like drops of blood. Modern medicine has a name for this, hematidrosis. A rare condition where extreme psychological stress causes capillaries near the sweat glands to burst, mixing blood into the perspiration. It has been documented in cases of extreme terror. Luke, who was a doctor, knew exactly what he was describing. This is not a serene Jesus floating above the suffering of humanity. This is a man whose body is breaking under the weight of what is coming, and who is still praying. Who is still saying, "Not my will, but yours." The first-century Jewish historian Josephus described the Roman practice of crucifixion as the most degrading and excruciating form of execution in the ancient world. Reserved specifically for the lowest criminals and rebellious slaves, a death designed not just to kill but to humiliate. Jesus knew exactly what was coming. The garden prayer was not uninformed surrender. It was fully informed surrender, and he said yes. Pay attention to this. Every prayer Jesus prays in Gethsemane ends the same way. Not my will, but yours. The first time. The second time. The third time. He asks for another way 3 times. And 3 times he arrives at the same place, the Father's will. Not his own. This is the architecture of every prayer Jesus ever prayed. Whether he is thanking the Father at the tomb of Lazarus or interceding for his disciples in the upper room or pressing his face into the dirt of Gethsemane, the shape is always the same. Honest need. Deep trust. Complete surrender. It is 9 in the morning, the soldiers have laid Jesus across the crossbeam. His arms are extended. The nails are iron. Square-shanked. Roughly the width of a finger. The first one goes through his right wrist at the space between the bones, the place the Romans knew would hold the weight of a man's body without tearing through. While they are doing this, while the hammer is still in the soldier's hand, Jesus prays, "Father, forgive them. For they do not know what they are doing." He is not praying this after the fact. He is not praying it from a distance. From safety. From the comfort of having survived the worst. He is praying it while it is happening, mid-sentence in the crucifixion. Mid-strike of the hammer. As if the prayer was always going to be there. Waiting for this moment. Already formed in his throat before the first nail was raised. The Greek word for forgive here is aphiemi, to release. To let go. To send away. It is the same word Jesus uses in the Lord's Prayer, "Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors." He is praying the template prayer. But this time, it is not a teaching. It is not a model for someone else to follow. It is the real thing. At full cost. With iron still going through his wrists. And notice who he is forgiving. He says they do not know what they are doing. The soldiers don't know they are executing the Son of God. The crowd doesn't know. Even the religious leaders who engineered the arrest don't fully know, Paul will write later. In 1 Corinthians. That if they had understood, they would never have crucified the Lord of glory. The prayer covers the ones who acted in ignorance. The ones who acted in malice. The ones who stood by and watched. And, if you're willing to follow the logic, the ones who would come after. Who would reject or ignore or simply never think about what happened on this hill. He prays for people who have not yet been born. This is the second time in the Gospel accounts that Jesus prays for people who do not yet exist. And this is where it gets remarkable, because what you are watching on the cross is not just an execution. You are watching a man pray through the worst moment of his life, not for rescue, not for relief, but for the people who put him there. You have probably prayed for people who hurt you. It is one of the hardest things a human being can do. You know what it costs. You know the gap between the words and the feeling. The distance between saying I forgive and actually meaning it all the way down. You know that prayer sometimes has to happen before the feeling arrives. That you say it to God because you cannot yet say it to the person. Jesus does not have that gap. There is no distance between his words and his meaning. He forgives as he is being killed. And he means it completely. And he asks the Father to honor it. This is the prayer that Eusebius of Caesarea, writing in the 4th century, called the proof that Christ's kingdom was unlike any kingdom the world had ever known. A Roman king prayed for his empire. A Jewish king prayed for his people. Jesus prayed for his executioners. No political or religious system in the ancient world had a category for that kind of prayer. At noon, darkness falls over the land, not a cloud passing in front of the sun. Not the dim grey of an overcast sky. Darkness, the kind Matthew and Mark describe as covering the whole land for 3 hours. From noon until 3 in the afternoon. The kind that made people stop talking. The kind that felt like something happening above the sky. Not in it. And then, at 3 o'clock, Jesus cries out, in a loud voice. Not a whisper. Not a dying man's last breath. A voice that carries across the hillside and makes the soldiers nearest the cross take a step back. Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? Here is the prayer I warned you about at the beginning of this video. 4 words in Aramaic, or in the Hebrew of Psalm 22. Where these words first appeared 1,000 years before Jesus was born, and they are the most theologically charged thing Jesus ever said. For 2,000 years, people have asked, what is happening here? Is Jesus losing his faith? Is this a moment of genuine abandonment? Is God the Father actually turning away from God the Son? Here is what we know. The words come directly from Psalm 22. And every Jewish listener on that hill would have known it. In the 1st century, it was common to refer to an entire psalm by its opening line. To quote the first words was to invoke the whole text. And Psalm 22 begins in darkness and ends in triumph. It begins with my God, why have you forsaken me, and it ends with the declaration that God has not hidden his face. That he has listened. That he has answered. The psalm that Jesus quotes as he dies is a psalm that ends with God answering. But here is what makes this prayer unlike any other prayer in the Bible. It is not addressed to Father. Every other prayer of Jesus, Gethsemane, Lazarus, John 17, the cross, begins with Father. The word in Aramaic is Abba. The word a child uses for their father. Intimate, immediate, close. Here, he says my God, not Father. God. Theologians have spent centuries trying to explain the distance in that single word. Something happened in those 3 hours of darkness. Something that was not just physical suffering, the body breaking under crucifixion, but something deeper. Something between the Son and the Father. Something connected to the full weight of human sin being carried in that moment. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians that God made him who had no sin to be sin for us. Not sinful. Sin itself. And that transaction, if we can even call it that, created a darkness inside the relationship of the Trinity that we may not have the language to describe. He cried out. He did not stay silent. He prayed from inside the abandonment. He prayed from the place where God felt absent. And that prayer, the prayer that sounds like lost faith, is itself an act of faith. You don't cry out to a God you no longer believe in. You don't demand an answer from a God you think has stopped listening. My God, even in the darkness, even in the absence, still mine. And then, almost immediately after, the final prayer, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. He is back to Father. The distance has closed. Whatever happened in those 3 hours is finished. And the word that returns to his lips is the word that has always been there. Abba. Father. Close. The words come from Psalm 31. Verse 5. In the Jewish tradition, this was a bedtime prayer, a prayer that Jewish mothers taught their children to say before sleep. A prayer of trust in the dark. Into your hands I commit my spirit. A child's prayer, said at the end of every day. Jesus says it at the end of his life. He dies the way a child goes to sleep, trusting the Father with what he cannot control. surrendering the night into hands that will still be there in the morning. This is the last prayer of Jesus, and then he is gone. 7 prayers. A hillside teaching about our Father in heaven. A thank you spoken out loud at a tomb while a dead man was still inside. 26 verses of intercession for disciples who would soon fall asleep and run away and deny everything. 3 rounds in a dark garden. Face in the dirt. Asking for another way. Forgiveness prayed over the people holding the hammer. A cry of desolation from inside 3 hours of supernatural darkness. And a child's bedtime prayer. Spoken as a last breath. 7 prayers. And through all of them, the same shape, honest need. Deep trust. Complete surrender. Here's what most people miss about the prayers of Jesus: they are not the prayers of a man performing religion. They are the prayers of a person who actually believes the Father is listening. There is no gap between what Jesus says to the crowd and what Jesus says to God. The Jesus who tells his disciples to pray in secret is the Jesus who goes to secret places to pray. The Jesus who teaches not as I will, but as you will is the Jesus who says it on the ground in Gethsemane when it costs everything. He did not teach what he did not live. Now watch what happens next, because these 7 prayers leave us with 3 things that will change how you pray. Starting today, the first is this: Jesus prayed when he was afraid, not after the fear passed. Not once he had clarity and peace and a sense of the Father's presence. He prayed in the garden when his body was breaking with dread. He prayed on the cross when the darkness had already fallen. If you have ever felt that you need to feel better before you can pray, that prayer requires a kind of spiritual composure you currently don't have, look at Gethsemane. Look at Eli. Eli. Look at a man praying from inside the worst moment of his life. With no guarantee of how it ends. With his friends asleep and his enemies on the way. You are never in too bad a place to pray. The garden proves it. The second is this: Jesus prayed for you before you existed. In John 17, he looked down through time, past the disciples, past the early church, past every century of believers, and prayed for the people who would come later. You are in that prayer. Whatever you are carrying right now, whatever doubt or grief or failure or confusion has made you feel unseen, you were seen. You were prayed for. You were named before you had a name. The third is this, and this is the one that will stay with you: every prayer of Jesus ended in surrender, not resignation, not defeat, not the dull acceptance of someone who has run out of options, but an active, chosen, clear-eyed decision to trust the Father with the outcome, even in Gethsemane, where the outcome was the cross, even at the tomb of Lazarus, where the outcome was a miracle he already knew was coming but chose to receive as gift rather than demand as right, even on the cross, where the outcome was death, and then, 3 days later, was not, he surrendered the answer. Every time. If there is a single practice that could transform your prayer life, not a technique, not a formula, not a number of minutes per day, it is this: end your prayers the way Jesus ended his. Whatever you are asking, whatever you are desperate for, whatever you have been bringing to God for months or years without an answer, close it with "not my will, but yours," not because God needs to hear it, but because you need to say it. Because surrender is not the end of the prayer. In the story of Jesus, surrender is always the beginning of the resurrection. If this video opened something in you, if you want to go deeper into how Jesus prayed, how he lived, how he moved through the world, hit subscribe. There's more coming. And if someone you know is struggling with prayer right now, wondering if it works, wondering if God is even listening, send them this video. It might be what they need today. My God, even in the darkness, still mine. He proved it was enough to keep praying. It still is.